Welcome to session 3 of Getting Started with Your JavaScript. In this session, we're going to start working with some operators and some operands and doing a little bit more of conditionals and understanding a little bit more about coding. Let's get started. There are different types of operators that we are going to be working with. We have what we call unary, which is one operand, or binary, which is two operands. There's also ternary, which is 3, and we'll talk about those a little bit later when we get into if statements. Incrementers and decrementers and negates are things that will take a single value. We are going to take our x is equal to 5, and we are going to use a plus incrementer on that variable to make that 5 a 6. Or we can decrement it. So we can use minus, and we can take that variable of my number that's currently equal to 5 and make it down to 4. So increasing or decreasing by one value. Negative, we can make those a negative value, just like in math. Binary operators use two operands, usually an x and a y, if you think of them in values of variables. You can use whatever variable name you want, but these are going to be adding or subtracting, multiplying or dividing. There is also a fifth operand here, which may be a little confusing if you've never seen it before, which is a percent sign, which means modulus. Modulus is actually a mathematical operator that means what is the remainder if you did the division. So if I took 4 and I divided it by 3, I am going to get 1.33333. What is my remainder? How many did I have left? And I had 1 left. So in that case, my modulus of 4 divided by 3, or 4 modulus 3, is going to equal 1. If I did 4 modulus 2, it's going to be 0 because there's only two options, 0 or 1. So options that you have depending on how the remainder works is the modulus operator. We use this a lot in determining even or odd. If it evenly divides by 2 and returns a 0, then you know that it's even. And if it does not evenly divide by 2, which means the modulus is 1, we know that that's odd. This is a really common thing in programming. We also have assignment operators, which is the equal sign. And we have the ability to take that equal sign and apply it with a math operator, which means we are going to, if we had a plus equal, we are going to add a value to the value and then reset it. So x plus equals y is going to be the same thing as x equals x plus y. It just combines both a assignment operator and a mathematical operator at the same time. We are going to use this to be able to modify our year in our code, but you're going to use these type of operators and operands as you go along with a lot of code. So understanding you can do mathematical operations with your JavaScript with values. Remember that plus sign, it concatenates with strings and it adds if it's numbers, so it knows the difference between the two. One of the very useful tools in JavaScript is our math object. Remember, everything is an object and there are methods underneath our objects. In this case, we have a standard math object, capital M. Remember how I said most things are lowercase unless it's very specific? This is a capital M for math, and that says you want to go get the math object. That math object has a couple of mathematical operations and properties associated with it. Absolute value, floors, ceilings, logs, mins, maxes, these kind of things, powers that you can do. One of my favorite ones is random. You can do a random number between 0 and 1. You can actually do a random number between multiple numbers. These are different math methods that you can use. There are also some constants like pi or log or e that are pretty common in mathematical operations, so we throw those in as well. We're going to show you how to use the floor operation in our code. So the floor operation is going to round down to the nearest integer. So if you have a decimal result as the result of a division, which a lot of times is going to occur, you can round that down or you can round it up, as opposed to just rounding, which will do your basic 5 or more, 4 or less option. So using the math object, let's look at how that looks with our dates. At this point, we're going to start calculating the number of days left in the year. So to do that, we need to take what is the new year and add a year to it. So above the comment here. So we already have what is the date. Now we're going to go ahead and calculate the days. To calculate, we are going to create a variable for our new year. And we are going to set that equal to a new date of January 1st, 2018. For the purposes of this lesson, we're going to assume January 1st, 2018 is going to be the first day of the year that we are currently in. But we need to add more to that. We need to change it to the next year, whatever the next year is. So we are going to have a var variable that is going to be our next year, which is going to be the current day, get full year, so whatever the year is, 2018, and we're going to add 1. So we can just do a mathematical operation on that year. So we're going to take 2018 and make it into 2019. Then we are going to take our new year, and we are going to set our full year for new year to whatever next year is. Okay, that's going to give our new year. New year. Set full year. Using the year of 2019. Next, we're going to find out how many days we have left. Days left. And that is going to be, what is the difference between new year, which will be January 1st, 2019, minus our current day. Now, this gets a little weird. How many days left? If I just did it like that, I'm actually going to have 1 day less because it's not going to include I'm not going to get the actual time. Dates are in seconds. They're stored in seconds. So the amount of days left is currently going to give me how many seconds are there between now and the next day. In this case, I'm going to have to divide it by, actually it's milliseconds. So get it up to seconds, minutes, hours, and days. So I'm going to take, I need another parenthesis. See, it's got a little squiggly. Lets me know if I've got some syntax errors. So new year minus current day in milliseconds. Milliseconds, and then I'm going to divide it by 1,000 to get the amount of seconds, divide it by 60 to get the number of minutes, divided by 60 again to get the number of hours, and then divided by 24 to get the number of days. That is now going to give me how many days do I have left as a number. Well, that's cool. I can come over here to my text content and just replace that with days left. So let's hit refresh. And you can see that it gives me this obnoxious 222 and then a dash, which is actually a period, 433 something or other, and a whole lot more. And if we scroll over, it still has the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. That's how many days. Oh, wait, because it was a decimal. We had to deal with the decimal thing here. So having it as a decimal, we can fix that. We are going to use a math function called floor. And floor is going to round it down to the nearest whole number. And now we have our 222 days. So the difference between 523 and January 1st is 222 days. We're going to go ahead and calculate the hours left as well as the minutes and the seconds. So here we have how many days left. I'm actually going to put that in a separate little one here. Calculate days, hours, mins, and seconds left. Always good to have some comments. Okay, so those are our days left. Hours left. Okay, in hours left, I can take the amount of days left without it being floored and divide that, or multiply that by 24 and subtract the total number of days left. So our hours left is going to be days left subtracting by math floor of days left, and then multiplying it by 24. So we could do this in 2 steps if we wanted to. Take how many days were left, that 222 with a bunch of decimals, and subtract off the 222 from it, which is what this is doing, and then multiplying it by 24 to find the actual hours left. Let's go ahead and check that real quick before I go on. Remember, we're also going to have to math floor. Actually, I'll leave that for now and we can refresh it. So you can see here that we took our hours left, which was the 222 point whatever it was, and subtracted the 222 to get the point whatever it was, and then multiplied by 24 to get 10 hours. But we still have to math floor that. And we will get 10 hours left. Because it's at 2:35, 10 more hours until it's time. Okay, we're going to go ahead and add in the remaining 2 for minutes and seconds. So now you can see we have our 222 with our 10 hours, 24 minutes, and 54 seconds. Because it was at 05, and it was at 35, and it was at 2. Okay, let's see what happens if we change this to the current date instead of May 23rd. So I am currently on 9/12, so we are going to set this to our current date. So first off, to set it to a current date, you use the default, which is just an open and close parenthesis. Okay, so that's going to go ahead and set it to our new date here, which means this will show up correctly. Unfortunately, we've done, actually it'll work just fine. We set this to January 1st, but then we got whatever the current day's full year is, 2020, and we'll add 1. So when I hit save and refresh, it will say that it is 9/12 at 2020 at 1:05 p.m. and 9 seconds. And there are 110 days, 11 hours, 54 minutes, and 50 seconds to get us to New Year's Day. We're now going to be creating our first function. Now, we've been using just regular procedural code where we're just writing code as it goes along, but most code is going to be broken down into functions, and it's really important for you to recognize that good programmers design their functions well. So you're going to take the concepts that you're going to use multiple times and you're going to break them into functions. You might only use the function once, but it's a good way to break up your code so that you understand it better. In this case, we are going to be creating a function. Now, basic functions are just a collection of commands that perform some sort of action and can possibly return a value. They don't have to. In some languages, methods don't return a value, but functions do. In JavaScript, you can call them anything you want, somewhere between functions and methods. They can accept parameters, which are variables that are associated with the function. If I pass in some numbers, I want to do some math on those numbers, or I want to do some changes to those numbers, so I can pass some parameters to my functions. If you do not include any parameters, you still need to include the parentheses. So we're going to declare our function with the keyword function, then the name of our function. The example here is calc area. That's the name of our function. And then at least an open and closed parenthesis. But in this case, we're actually using variables. So we're passing in some parameters. So our length and width are the parameters that we're passing in. Recognize when you create a function, you have to call it. So in the example here, after we've written our function, our name, and our parameters, we use curly braces to contain all of the commands that we're going to put inside here. And if we choose to, we can use the return keyword to return a value. As you can see, when it is being called or running the function, we can give it the parameters. You notice that calc area, the calling of the function over on the right-hand side, uses the variables x and y as my parameters. They will get passed into my function as length and width in order, and and then it will return. So my total area will equal whatever my return value is. In this case, length times width. You do not need to use a return keyword. You can just have your function do something without returning anything. That's okay. And there's another concept that has to do with scope. Any programming class you ever take should reference the term scope. So I'm going to reference it here. Scope is where are your variables valid inside of your code. We have local or we have global. Generally, you want to use local variables. So you want to stay in your local scope. And what that means is that those variables are only valid within the function or method in which they're defined. My function calc area here has a variable called rectangle area or rect area. It is only valid inside of this function. So if I am outside of this function, somewhere else in my code, and I try to reference rect area, it's not going to know what it is. It's not going to know what the variable is because its scope is only inside of my function. It's a local scope. You can have global scope, which is variables available anywhere within your script file. Again, try to stay away from this. Beginning programmers always think it's easier to have all of your variables like, I'm going to make them all global and make it all easy because I can use them anywhere. It's actually a really bad programming practice. So you want to stay out of the idea of using global variables unless it's necessary. You can use global variables. It's not always a bad thing. It's just you want to be careful and use them only where it's necessary. Now, one of the cool things that we're going to do with this is that we're going to be running a clock. So we're going to have a clock that's going to move and change our current time as our current time changes and change our seconds to clock them down. So back over to my script, I'm going to go ahead and write my comment and I'm going to write my function because the point of this site is to do a countdown clock. And we're going to make a new function. So we're going to call it function, keyword function, run clock, and open and close parentheses. If you are new to programming, this may take a while for you to get comfortable with. Functions always have parentheses so that we know that there may or may not be parameters in there, but there are always parentheses. And then open and close curly braces. This is different for different languages, so just a heads up on that. Inside my run clock, I'm going to put all of this code. So I'm actually going to do this. I'm going to grab here, X, I'm going to plop it up at the top. So all of this changes every time run clock gets called. I'm going to tab that in so that it's a little cleaner. Okay. Make sure your curly braces match. Run clock is this code here. You can also click this little down arrow here. If it doesn't nicely click, that means you're probably not getting your curly braces correct. Okay, so now we have all of our function code to do our run clock function. Of course, we have not called our function yet. So if I hit refresh right now, everything goes back to that default values that we had in there originally because I haven't run my function. So I need to run my function. In this case, I'm going to run my function up at the top. I'm going to execute. And we're just going to call run clock. Open and close parentheses. There are no parameters here. Okay, so this piece of code, this function, is now going to get called here and get run. So now when I hit refresh, everything's back to normal. So in our code, we want to have a time delayed command. We want to have the ability for code to occur at specific points. In our case, we're going to be having it run a piece of code every second. So we have two different ways of doing this, one of which is a time delayed that gives a delay to when this is run. Remember how I said the code is run immediately as soon as it's found? You can choose to say, I want you to wait 5 seconds and then go ahead and run this code. So it does something specific after a period of time. Those are timeouts. So we can set the timeout with a given delay. Remember, the delay is currently in milliseconds unless it's defined otherwise. So you can do a timeout that way. You can also have it run every X amount of time, again, defaulting to milliseconds, and those commands are run at the same time. So if I have the 3 set timeouts here at 50, 100, and 150, they will run at 50 milliseconds, 100 milliseconds, and 150 milliseconds. So they'll run in sequence. If I set them all to 50, all 3 would run at the same time. Once you have done that, you can have another piece of code that's going to clear your timeout or clear your interval so that it stops at some point. You can say, I want to run this with a delay, and then it's going to stop, and it's going to stop running. So you can have a clear timeout to remove those. Let's look at how we can do those with our code. The last thing we're going to do is tell it to run the clock every second. So we're going to run it the first time. That'll be fine. Then we're going to tell it to do it every second, so it refreshes that time every second. So I'm going to set my interval, and I'm going to call the function run clock in quotes with the open and close parentheses. After that, I'm going to put in 1,000 milliseconds because that's how long we have in intervals. So every second or every 1,000 milliseconds, it's going to call the code run clock again. Now when I hit refresh, you'll see 3, 4, this is counting down, this is moving up. Our minutes will change as necessary as time goes on. Sometimes you're going to find code that you need to understand how the numeric values are being controlled. There are different times that you will run into numbers that are not a number. If it's an A and you expect it to be a number, you can check that with an if. So an if, not a number, NaN, and then it will return either a true or false if the number is a number. Is finite returns if the variable is not infinity. This can happen if you're doing division or if you're doing something with mathematics and you end up with an infinity result. You can say, is the number finite? So finite is useful. The more useful, I think, is the to fixed, which allows you to take a decimal and fix it at a certain number of decimal points. If you are doing something with math, with dollar amounts, and you want it to be limited to 2 decimal places, because sometimes it's going to end up with multiple decimal places because we're multiplying to find tax rates or something like that. You can take the variable and you can use to fixed to allow it to limit to a certain number of decimal places. As you can see here, we did to fixed 0 to get it straight to an integer. You could also use round or floor or ceiling for this one. You can use to fixed 1 and to fixed 2 to give it 1 or 2 decimal places. You can also do a precision, which allows it to set the significant digits. If you get into any chemistry or things that involve, or physics that you need to keep track of your precision, this keeps track of your significant digits for you to say how many significant digits, as opposed to a fixed decimal level. So for your projects for this chapter, the first one is going to be similar to the tutorial. It's going to be a countdown to the summer party. And the summer party has a date that it's going to assign to. So it's going to look very, very similar to the tutorial. Hopefully you can go back and reference the tutorial if you need to. Follow the directions very closely, because if you miss letters or numbers in your variable names, something like that, it can be really hard to get these wrong. Most of the code is done for you. You are welcome to modify this as necessary, but it is not part of the assignment. So it's up to you if you want to change it to welcome to Great Falls instead of welcome to Tulsa or something along those lines. The important part is to make sure you follow all of the requirements and make sure that you write your code specifically to allow the countdown to work correctly. You can choose to submit this in your website or zip it and put it in D2L. Our case 1 is going to be modifying an image to be appropriate with whatever time it is. So this is going to be, what are the constellations that are visible at this point, the time that you are looking at, which means you're going to be figuring out what today is. You're going to figure out what hour it is, and then you are going to use that to be able to say, you should be able to see these constellations in the sky. They've given you the 24 images for 24 hours, so it should have each image for each respective hours. Follow the directions in this one as well, because it's going to be altering which image do you want to put in that section of this kind of window, based on what hour it is. So kind of more of a little fun project. I actually thought this one was fun to do. Again, when you are finished, you can either submit it to D2L or include it in your website. Your case 4 project is going to be similar to a web form that has ticket payments for the theater. We've talked about the theater in a couple projects. You are not going to be creating the form because that's already created for you. What you are going to be creating is the countdown timer for the checkout page. So the countdown timer says that you have 30 minutes or whatever time it says in the assignment to order your tickets before they release your seats back to the list of available seats. You'll see this a lot in Ticketmaster type projects where it says you can't go in and say, I want to have these 3 front row seats and then wait 4 days to be able to hit submit. You have to do it within 30 seconds or 30 minutes or whatever it is. The main point of this project is that countdown function, which you are going to build from scratch. So it's really important for you to think about how would you build that project? Think about the algorithm. How would you do the task? How would you actually say, this is the time that I got to this page. I need to know what the countdown is to get from here to however many minutes I have, and design your code. Make sure that you follow the requirements. There is a requirement for a leading 0 in your 0 to 9. So if it gets 26 minutes and 6 seconds, it needs to say 06 instead of 6. So you'll be able to find out how to do that. And if you want to modify it, you are welcome to it. Again, if you want to modify some of the things on this page, but they are not requirements and you're not necessary to do that. When you're finished, go ahead and attach it to your website. This is your case 4. You wrote the code for it. And go ahead and submit that. If you still want to submit it to D2L, that's as well. That's fine, but I do want to see it on your personal website. Hopefully chapter 9 was kind of fun. You got to learn some basics of programming and be able to use some JavaScript. Can't wait to see you next time for chapter 10, where we start working with conditionals and some other things that we can do with JavaScript. Have a great week.